All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you to everyone out there, as always, for listening, watching, however you consume the show. I do appreciate you very much. Today's episode is sponsored by Sunny Reds, 1531 Abbey Road, Lackawanna, about 5 minutes or so down the road from Highmark Stadium. So the Super Bowl is over. Everybody is back to 0-0. The Buffalo Sabres and the rest of the league are on a 2-week break. We'll get into all that stuff because I am joined right now by Chris Ostrander from Two in the Box. What's going on, buddy? Hey, John. Not last week, the week before. Really enjoyed you. A lot of positive feedback from people who enjoy this show. So it's good to have you out, man. How you doing?
Not too bad. I appreciate hearing that. That's great. Happy to be here
Yeah.
again.
A lot better than Joe from Queens, that's for sure, man.
That's a low bar. That's a low bar.
So today I kind of want to focus on the respective general managers of the Sabres and the Bills. Of course, Brandon Beane, Kevyn Adams for different reasons, of course. But before that, and by the way, Two in the Box, a great thought piece that you got out. Go check that out. It's about many NHL rumors that you addressed. You really are a hockey dude, but I do love having you on the show because you're also a football guy. You just don't really get an opportunity to write about the Bills, of course, because you're writing about hockey. I wanted to ask you about the Super Bowl and kind of like your headspace going into the game as opposed to maybe after the game. Like with me, I kind of got myself to a point. I was obviously, devastated as a Bills fan, like you and a lot of other people, that the Bills fell a game short. But I kind of made peace with myself throughout the week last week, leading up to the Super Bowl until about maybe 2 or 3 hours before the game. And I started seeing warm-ups and things like that and the Chiefs coming on the field. That's kind of hit me all over again. But the way the game turned out, I was back to being at peace with it. It was actually kind of fun to watch, a nice little consolation prize to see what Philly did to Kansas City. But anyway, what was your mindset going into the Super Bowl on Sunday before the game, and how are you feeling, now that it's over right now?
Well, certainly feeling good now that it's done and that Philly won. That was a nice way to end the season, all things considered. But going into it, I was kind of like you. I think just at peace with it. I try to keep my sports relationships transactional with the Bills and the Sabres, so that I don't get too high or too low if things go poorly. I'm getting my hair cut, and my barber's like, "Are you going to boycott the game?" I was like, "No, I'm going to find a way to watch it. We'll figure it out." Like, I wasn't on board with that. I still want to see the show, right?
Sure.
So yeah, no, I was pretty chill about the whole thing to begin with. It was, the Bills got beat. It wasn't their day, and just I wanted to go into it, and hopefully it was going to be a good game. And I know some people think it wasn't a great game because it was a blowout, but quite frankly, I thought it was terrific. So
I was going to ask you that. How surprised are you? Now, look, I did a show the Friday before the game, and I actually picked Philly to win 32-19. So I had Philly winning by 13 points. So I wasn't surprised that Philly won, but I'd be a complete liar if I didn't say I was shocked at how much they dominated the game. I mean, 40-22, and the score was not that close. It was garbage time at the end for the Kansas City Chiefs, but 24-0 at the half. That was probably the last thing on the face of this earth that I expected. Now, I expected Philly to get off to a good start. The Chiefs, I think I saw a stat that they've trailed like in 10 points in all the Super Bowl wins that they've had. So not surprising, but when Cooper DeJean had that pick six and to make it 17-0, I was like, whoa. And then bam, 24-0. How shocked are you the way the game played out?
The turning point, I think, for me was that second pick when they turned it over deep in their own territory.
Yeah, Zach Bond.
Yeah, when Mahomes got hit in the end zone and threw that, and they were either the 15 or the 18 or something like that. I was like, oh my gosh! I'm like, this is not going the way I thought. And even still though, like and maybe this is like Brady PTSD, and now Mahomes is such a monster too. But like, I was still like, all right, how much time do they have in the second half? I was like, all right, how much time is left? How many drives do they need to make this a game again? I'm like, are they gonna, is this gonna be 28-3 all over again, sort of thing? but yeah, that like I think it was that second pick. I was like, oh, like this is not the game. This is not the game I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And that's the point where I was like, oh, I feel like Philly's really like their D line was whooping them. Like it was just they put on a clinic on D.
It
I mean,
was
everyone talked about Spags, right? Like everyone's like, oh, what's Spagnuolo going to throw at him? How is he going to stop Barkley? And it was Fangio. He stole the show.
for sure. And look, yeah, this was like 2020 all over again, what Tampa did to them in the Super
Yeah,
Bowl. But I would even point back to that one and say, I thought the Chiefs had a legitimate excuse because they had 3 starters on the offensive line that were out for the game.
yeah.
That was
And
not the
Mahomes was hurt for that one too, right?
Yeah, he had a bad
That's what I
ankle.
thought.
So I
That's
mean,
yeah. Okay.
they were literally the walking wounded going into that game. That was not the case this time around. And that's a good point where you said the game kind of got out of hand because it was 17-0. It was 3rd and 26. It was about to be 3rd and 26. And the Kansas City Chiefs, Nick Bolte got a personal foul, which they had an opportunity. I thought they were going to have an opportunity to double dip at the time. I'm like, well, it's 17-0. The Chiefs could get right back in this game. But they got a personal foul. Didn't end up mattering because it did matter. It led to a punt because eventually they did stop them, although they did flip the field. And to your point, that's where that interception came. And then bam, it's 24-0, and that's a wrap. But to me, like I said, I anticipated the Eagles winning this game, but I'm not gonna lie. If you would have told me, all right, the Eagles are gonna absolutely curb stomp the Chiefs, and Saquon Barkley's only gonna have 57 yards on 25 carries, that's where I would have said you're really nuts because I thought the formula for the Eagles was going to be run the football. We saw the Bills do that in the 3rd quarter of the AFC Championship. I'm like, they're just going to shove Saquon Barkley down their throats. He's probably going to run for $130, $140, but they didn't. I mean, they sold out to stop the run. And then Jalen Hurts, who I feel like is not getting enough credit right now. All these talking points about the Chiefs losing and the defensive front four, all that's true, but Jalen Hurts had a hell of a game. I
Oh
mean, he
yeah.
made a couple fantastic throws. He knew when to run. He was committed with his legs. It was an elite performance from Jalen Hurts. He deserves a lot of props.
No, I thought he was. I mean, I wouldn't say dominant, but
Yeah.
he was clinical for sure. And I feel like you mentioned like making plays with his legs, like those later drives. Again, and the game was kind of out of hand, but when he was starting to escape the pressure, and he gashed him for 10, 15 yards a pop there late in the game. I was like, oh wow, like he was feeling it. He really was.
Yeah. So we're recording this, by the way, for everyone listening Monday around lunchtime, just in case some kind of news ends up coming out. Big news, be like, why did you guys cover that on the show? Because we're recording this Monday. I get this hunch, and I don't know, man. We'll find out in the next 24 hours or so, but you might see a couple things from this game. Like, I think Travis Kelce might be done. I don't know what's going to come today. I think DeAndre Hopkins might be done. There might even be a couple other things going on with the Chiefs. We'll see. It would not surprise me. Certainly not the way that they wanted to go out. Travis Kelce had a rough last couple of weeks. He didn't do nothing against the Bills, and he didn't do anything against Philly either. We'll see how that plays out. But anyway, like I said, I want to make today about the 2 Buffalo GMs. So let's stay on the football side. We'll start with Brandon Beane. Look, not breaking news here. Before this game even took place, the Super Bowl, I feel like everybody knows that the Bills need to go get some help on their defensive line. But before we get into any specific players or possibilities, let me ask you this. How much do you think watching that Philadelphia game and how they beat up Patrick Mahomes, how much do you think that influences a team, maybe not even just like the Bills, but every team like in the AFC or the NFC, I suppose, too, that might be like on that cusp of getting over the hump and getting into a Super Bowl, seeing how they did it, a front four. They literally didn't blitz at all that game, literally at all. How much do you think that game is like a blueprint for the rest of the league? How much do you think that's going to like change mindsets maybe of some organizations and probably drive the price of poker up a lot for some of these studs that may be available via trade, which we'll talk about in a few.
Oh yeah, I think it's. I mean, how many of these other reaction pieces are going to call the NFL a copycat league, right? Like,
Yeah,
I feel like every other one's going to mention it, and there's no way that these teams don't look at it. I mean, even looking at KC, because I think Chris Jones is just such a monster, and I know he was pretty quiet last night. Seemed like he was a little banged up, but like
Yeah.
You think of these teams where you have a guy in the front four, whether it's interior, out, or on edge, who just can influence every play. And obviously, the big talking point with Garrett's trade request and some of these other guys who might be on the market, it's really going to, I think, create a lot of momentum for teams that have, whether it's a suspect defense or just simply they get by, the Bills bend don't break mentality, if you will. Um, it's gonna, I think, I would imagine it's gonna influence those teams. And I feel like the Bills, when the Bills went and got Vaughn, it was kind of the same thing where they said, okay, in order to beat the Chiefs, in order to get to
Mhm.
Mahomes, we got to get a guy who we can put out there, we can count on him to go influence the game. Um, and it hasn't really gone that way, unfortunately. But overall, I think that's got to be the direction they want to head in.
Yeah. All right, well, Myles Garrett is obviously the big name, and he has requested a trade. Other guys that potentially could be out there, Max Crosby we've heard his name a lot. Although, who knows with the Raiders? I mean, the dude wants to win. They hired Pete Carroll. I don't think they brought in Pete Carroll to start from scratch all over again and necessarily want to get rid of a game wrecking caliber player like Max Crosby. Trey Hendrickson with Cincinnati is another guy. Um, with the Bengals, it comes down to you just can't pay everybody. You got
Mhm.
Jamar Chase, you got T. Higgins, you got Hendrickson. There's a lot of momentum going there that they could be making a move. But again, you're the Bengals. You're like, well, our defense sucks as it is. You want to go trade in our most effective pass rusher? Where's the logic in that? And then there's been some whispers anyway over the last few days that maybe even Micah Parsons would be available. Now, obviously, that would be incredibly interesting. Then there's a couple free agents. Look, let me ask you a quick question here. How much stock can you put in one game? Because Josh Sweat from the Philadelphia Eagles was somebody that I thought maybe a little bit about, but I didn't think all that much about. But what we saw Sunday night, he just absolutely dominated that game. He is a pending unrestricted free agent. Philly's got some guys that they're going to have to pay. They're not going to be able to pay all of them. Maybe they franchise tag him, but no team wants to franchise tag a guy and put $23 million or so against their cap for next year. Philly's got a lot of pretty big contracts right now and more coming up. So it's possible he could be out there. How much money does a guy like that do you think potentially make in literally just one game? Because to me, the answer is kind of a lot.
I've got to think he made himself an easy $10 million.
Yeah,
Like over what he might have gotten paid otherwise.
yeah,
Because he was. At one point, I was like, I think this is gonna. I thought he might be the MVP.
yeah,
Like he was that impactful, and he wasn't doing it himself, of course. But I think their interior line was just as influenced just as much. But he was cleaning up the mess, right?
yeah,
Um, so no, I'd have to imagine if he was going to make, maybe he was going to get 12, 13, maybe
yeah.
on the open market to start. Like he could. He's probably flirting with 20, somewhere in that
Probably.
neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah. Khalil Mack's another guy too. Of course, now that would be more of a short term, little stopgap kind of deal. But anyway, guys like Sweat, Mack could be free agents. We just went over some of the potential trade candidates. How all in right now, knowing the Bills? I mean, obviously, we watch the Bills every week and seeing what Philly did and seeing what Tampa did a handful of years ago, seeing what, when the New York Giants beat the Patriots twice in the Super Bowl, kind of the same deal. You beat these great quarterbacks, these great teams. You got to be able to get home with 4 and really win in the trenches. And that's what these teams have done. That is what the Buffalo Bills do not do often enough. The salary cap situation, not going to be, it's not splendid, but it is definitely better than it was a year ago with the Bills. You're Brandon Beane right now. How all in are you to solidifying that spot? Now we're talking about edges, but defensive tackle is also something, we'll get to that in a minute, that I think is equally, possibly even more important. But how all in right now are you with the edges? Because you got AJ Epinesa, who's going to be back, pretty cheap deal. But the big one is Greg Rizzo. I mean, he's going to be here this year unless you trade him. 14 million or so is his cap number. Unless you extend him, you can kind of work that out. But I don't know if that's the right move there. How all in is Brandon Beane going to be, and should he be, when it comes to getting not just some talent on the edge, not like not the next Dwan Smoots or even Leonard Floyd, somebody who could like literally make a big difference in a football game.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it because, like, as much as Epinesa's come around, He is not, and not that he was a premium draft pick or anything like that, but
Right.
he's certainly not the game breaker that you need as a pass rusher. Like, he'll flash it now and then. He does some things well, but overall, I think he's more of a role player. Um, that's my opinion. So it's. I mean, I think back to what we talked about 2 weeks ago, and Beane saying in his press conference, I don't like the idea of being one player away or whatever it is. And I mean, after watching last night, yeah, like you need a D tackle, you need a D end, you might need an X, right? Like you might need
Yeah.
a stud wideout. So like, yeah, they need a few pieces. So in terms of saying all in, I mean, maybe the cap doesn't even allow for it, to be honest with you. But I mean, yeah, you're talking about probably using your first round pick on a D tackle. Maybe you go find, maybe if the right deal's out there for whether it's a Parsons, Garrett, whoever, maybe you try to pull that trigger. I guess it all just comes down to like you look at Josh Allen and you look at your window, and you've got to make the most effort you can every year that Allen is healthy, playing at MVP level. You got to push your chips in the middle. So I think philosophically, you got to hope that he's all in. But I, knowing how he's operated with the cap, given how this last year went, with trying to get a little bit of a soft reset with some of their cap spending, I just wonder if he tries to be strategic again, less so than really starting to be like a riverboat gambler. But
You know what? Kind of a takeaway that I have from the Super Bowl right now when it comes to Philadelphia that may make me at least a little bit kind of change course is all right. So Garrett Crosby again, these big name guys, and God, they would look good in a Bills uniform, no question about it. But the draft capital or the resources you would have to give up to get them, I'm kind of talking myself into being in the boat where if Sweat hits the market, go after him. If he's not available, go after Khalil Mack. Even if you're going to get 2 years out of him, you worry about the position in another years and keep your picks, but keep pounding at that defensive line position in the draft. You said it. First round pick on a defensive tackle just seems so logical right now for the Buffalo Bills. And God, I'm having a little bit of hesitancy about giving up these picks. That said, we all know that Brandon Beane's track record on these high picks over the last few years has been less than stellar. God, I don't know. Hook or crook is kind of like
yeah,
you got to find a way to improve this defensive line, and it's not even just the edge. Look, guys like Garrett and Crosby obviously are dominating conversations, but to me, when I look at last night, and I look at the Bills and go back. I think one of the biggest things they need to do. Let me know if you agree on this. I think they need to move on right now from DaQuan Jones. That was one of my big takeaways from the Super Bowl on Sunday night. DaQuan Jones, I like him a lot. I kind of advocated for his re-signing a year ago, so I don't want to sound too hypocritical. But the dude is 33 years old, and he's just flat out, he's not even close to being the same player he was before he tore that pec in London. Like that first month of the season of 2023, I thought he was spectacular. He tore that pec, he came back, and he's been pedestrian ever since, including all of last year. The thing is, it's got to be a football move and not a financial move because I looked up the numbers. If you were to cut DaQuan Jones tomorrow, you're going to eat $7.6 million in dead cap money, and you're only going to save 1.8. That's not a lot. Now you can make it post June 1st. You eat like nearly 4, and you could save 5.5. But I think this is a situation where you need to throw the money away and you need to make a football move. Like they need to go get an impactful type of defensive tackle. Could you make a case, Chris, that doing that, and I don't know who the player would be right now, it's too early to kind of really sink my teeth
right.
into that, but that position itself, solidifying that position alongside Ed Oliver, could you make a case that that might be as important as going to get a premium edge rusher?
I mean, up until last night, and honestly, probably through today too, I would probably have said that would be my preference.
Yeah.
Like I was, we have beer league hockey that I play in the away to game last Sunday. And we're doing our Bills post mortem because we hadn't seen each other since the game. But I was like, I think a guy like Chris Jones, again, a guy like Jones, they can run him outside, they can run him inside, but he's so impactful that I'm kind of like I kind of like what he does to the game and how he influences an offense more than like when Von Miller did, even when he was healthy.
Mhm.
So like I'm like the way I'm looking at it, I'm thinking like I think I'd rather see the Bills go find a stud D tackle again. And I don't know who you're going to pull out of your hat, but that strikes me as a player in a position that could do more for them than trying to go get Max Crosby or like I'm not a big Max Crosby fan myself. Like, kind of
Yeah.
a hot take, but going to get a Crosby or a Garrett or someone like that who they're going to get 15 sacks in the season, but if they get if they're on for 75% of the snaps on offense or on defense, I'm sorry, there's going to be a lot where they don't really influence a lot of the plays, but
The the take that is in development for me right now that I might throw at people for the next handful of weeks that might drive some people nuts is that if I'm going to push all my chips in for a trade, I might, instead of trading for Myles Garrett, I might want to trade for try to trade for Jeffrey Simmons. Like I might give up some ones and maybe more to go to Tennessee and go get Jeffrey Simmons, who's just an incredible defensive tackle who could do so much, man. It would make Ed Oliver better. It would make Greg Rizzo better. And then you get other, maybe less expensive options, maybe a draft pick at edge as well. But not all the way there yet, but like I said, that's in development. A guy like that might even be a bigger priority for me. Generally speaking, though, doesn't this offseason feel a little bit, not that it's going to be easy, it's not, but a little more easily defined for Brandon Beane, what he needs to do, as opposed to last season where, oh my God, I gotta pillage this roster. I gotta shed a lot of money. I gotta get rid of a lot of guys that I really don't want to get rid of, guys who have been core players, leaders in the locker room. This season, it feels a little more defined. Like I think you need to
yeah.
go. You need to go get another receiver on offense. I think, which God, 1 year in, we'll see how it plays out. But if you're worthy, sure sounds like what the Bills could use. Ain't it speed to take over the top jet sweep guy? I don't want to say yards after the catch, but he does a lot of special things. I don't care that game was a blowout. That was pretty impressive the way he got behind two guys at the end last night, and he had the focus to haul it in and make a catch. He had a big game for them. Whether it was for, it went, for all for naught or whatever. But anyway, my point is this. Can't do nothing about it now, but he would look really good right now. Offensively, I think that's all you need. You need a receiver. They're set in the line, the running backs, tight ends, that's open and shut. Defense, we talked about edge. When we've talked about defensive tackle, I think they need to address both of them. And then the other thing is CB2. How high would you be right now on bringing back Rasul Douglas, or is that a position that you think you can look to the market to upgrade? Because it didn't seem like the same player to me
No.
at the end of the season, but maybe that's just me and maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, and maybe he just got worn out, a little banged up, but he was not as impactful as he was even like especially after they traded for him, no question. But yeah, he seemed like he was not a liability, but yeah, he was definitely not not a shutdown force for sure. And then of course you lose Benford so early in that KC game, and it throws everything into the blender. But it's tough. Yeah, like I agree with you. Like it's a more fully formed roster. They're probably pretty comfortable with where they are at safety, I would say. Um, yeah, so like you can ask some questions about what they want to do at wideout. You can obviously, as we talked about with the D line, but then you got to figure out what your corner situation is going to be. No question. Um, that's a tough one too, because Douglas, proven commodity. I would imagine he's not going to break your bank in terms of a contract ask, at least compared to,
Right.
pardon me, at least compared to like a really high end guy. Um, but yeah, what player are you getting?
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
think
Elam's back too. Like, who's behind these two guys too is my other thing.
sure.
But
Look, I think in a perfect world, ideally, they were really hoping Kyrie Elam could develop into that guy where you let Douglas go and Elam becomes a starter. But what we've seen when he gets an opportunity, it's not going to happen.
mhm.
It's just not going to. And one thing about Brandon Beane, this being a critical offseason for him and stuff, something that's beyond his control now, but really needs to happen for him to go a long way towards him being a successful GM is some of these picks, even from this past year, we're talking about some of these needs, receiver, defensive line depth, or players who could play on the defensive lines. Some of these picks from last year need to hit in year two. Like Keon Coleman needs to hit in year 2. That'll make you forget a lot about Xavier Worthy or Dwayne Carter, the guy who it basically was Coleman and Dwayne Carter for Xavier Worthy. You want to look at the trade that way. Dwayne Carter showed a little bit of flash, got hurt, wrist injury, just like Keon. He needs to hit in year 2. He needs to take a big step. Cole Bishop, you draft guys in the second round to become starters. You're going to, DeMar Hamlin, they probably let walk, and everyone's talking about safeties. Nah, Rapp and Bishop will be your safeties next year. Bishop needs to hit. Maybe Javon Sullivan. I think he could play. I think he could do what Von Miller does right now, 15 snaps a game. You know what I mean? And do it for about, 1/10 of the money? So he needs to hit a little bit in year 2, because I do think the Bills are going to say goodbye to Von Miller this offseason. It just doesn't make any sense financially to keep him, even if you could rework a deal. And honestly, at this point of his career, I think you could get a better player than Von Miller. Again, sometimes it's not even about money. You want to upgrade, forget about just saving money. You want to upgrade over what Von Miller is. You want to upgrade over what DeQuan Jones is on this football team. Last Bills question, we'll take a quick break here and talk Sabres. Extension candidates. There's a handful of guys going into the last years of their deals right now. Greg Rizzo, James Cook, Khalil Shakir, Benford, and Terrell Bernard. They're all going into the final years of their deal. Is there anyone that you're looking to try to extend this offseason? And I would preface this by saying this. Greg Rizzo is the only guy, if it's for cap reasons, like sometimes when you give an extension, it actually helps your cap this year. All those guys were mid to low picks, so their cap number was already low. You're not really saving cap money for this year, but that doesn't mean you still want to extend them if you can, because you want to keep them here for years to come. But that list itself, is there any one or two names or anyone out there that you're like, man, I really want to make sure if I'm Brandon Beane, I get this deal done this offseason?
I mean, the easy button is Cook and Shakir, and I think of the two, I really think Shakir is almost underrated in a way. I think in how he impacts their offense. He does like sort of the Cole Beasley safety valve thing where he can go sit down in a zone and he's open, and they got a few little gadget plays for him that he's just great at. And so, yeah, between him and Cook, honestly, it would be those two for me. But I think those are maybe the two most obvious answers. I'm not down on Rousseau by any means, but I do like, I just kind of like, I guess I'm like, I just want to see a little bit more from him before I can really say so. Cause he'll have these like 4 or 5 week stretches where he looks like a monster. And then he's got 4 or 5 weeks where he's a ghost. So, and is that because he's not, they're directing more attention to him versus the interior? Is it just matchup related? I don't know what it is, but like every once in a while, I'm kind of like, do we really want to give him, is he really going to be a $25-30 million D end, or like, is that money better spent elsewhere? It's hard, but it's also hard to keep resetting at all these positions too. Like that's not, you don't want to find yourself doing that, but
that's the thing.
I mean, Cook and Shakir, I think easy answer, but
look, Greg Rizzo is an enigma to me. I'm still upset about when I look back at the AFC Championship game. One of the 3 things that probably upsets me the most is just how irrelevant Greg Rizzo was in that game. That gives me pause. I'm not giving a guy a 5-year contract at $25 million per. Let him play out his 5th year. I'm not extending him right now, which again, he's the one guy, if you're looking to save cap space, where you could actually, save some cap space by doing it, but I'm not doing it. All the other guys, though, the 2 you mentioned, and I'd say the 2 guys on defense too, Benford and Bernard, if I'm Brandon Beane, I'm actively trying to get as many of those guys locked up as I possibly can, because they're core players. They're all part of a young nucleus on this football team. We'll see how it plays out, but this is going to be an eventful and critical offseason for Brandon Beane. Look, you only get so many, I said it last week, wax at the pinata with Josh Allen in his prime. You know what I mean? And you got an opportunity, you need to get better up front on the defense. I don't even want to say trenches, because the Bills are good. They're solid on the offensive line, but they got to get better on the other side of the ball up front. So we'll see how it plays out. Anyway, take a real quick break, come back with Chris, and we'll dive into a little bit of Sabres and Kevyn Adams talk as well. All right, I am back here with Chris Ostrander from 2 in the Box, also the Instigator podcast. All right, Buffalo Sabres. Let me start here. We're 54 games into the season. I'm going to be composed and relaxed. I'm not going to lose my shit on the Sabres like I do almost every time I talk about them on this show. What is your level right now of shock that Not that the Sabres aren't in like a playoff race, but what's your level of shock right now that 54 games in, the Sabres are dead last in the Eastern Conference, and they're in dead last by 6 points too. It's not even like, they're just like 3 points away from being 8th or 10th in the conference. They're like buried in the bottom, dead last by 6 points right now. What's your level of shock as opposed to what you were feeling about this team back in early October?
Oh yeah, compared to like the off season and entering camp, if you had said like they're going to be 30th in the league or 29th, I think they're right now. But if you had said to me at that time, like, no, in ahead of the Four Nations face-off break, they're going to be last in the East and bottom 4 in the NHL, I would have been like, get out of here, come on, like they got too much talent for that. But given how the season has gone, like the way that this has progressed, it's like, well, yeah, no kidding. But no, the expectations and the way that they tried to address the off season, I mean, this is an unmitigated disaster of a year for them. It's been brutal, and it's hard to look and be like, okay, well, like where's the fix? Because like, I mean, power play still. I know we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but like, there's just so many things that just aren't going right for them. So, yeah, overall, like compared to the vibes in September even to now is like night and day. But
I'm a little bit. All right, now let's got to undo with Kevyn Adams, and then we'll get to Kevyn Adams here in a second. But I guess the thing that baffles me the most about this year's team is the scoring has been back up. Like since around Christmas, I think they're near the top of the league in scoring. So they've scored plenty. They got 3 top 4 pick defensemen on their blue line, top 4 overall pick on their blue line right now. Why has UPL been so inconsistent?
yeah,
Because last year, I thought he played great. He gets a 5-year deal. Not that it's a ridiculous deal. Not that they can't move it, or not that automatically makes him the number 1 goalie for the next 3 to 4 years. That's not what I'm saying. But he got rewarded with a 5-year deal, and he was really good last year. But is he regressed like kind of significantly this year? He certainly seems inconsistent right now.
yeah.
I don't know. I guess I'm just baffled because, like, when something starts working for this team, it's like something else. It's like a piece of shit, my piece of shit car. Every time I bring it to the mechanic, they fix the brakes, and then bam, the air compressor's not working. I get that fixed, and then it's something else. It's like an old leaky car where there's always something wrong. Like, why is UPL not playing better this year? What's going on with that?
Yeah, he's really had like a very much of a roller coaster year where he'll have like 3-4 games where he's on it. He's top
Hmm.
of his game. He's sharp. He's gonna give you 35 saves, and he's gonna be one of the key reasons you win the game. And then he's gonna have a game like he did in Nashville the other night where you're like, Jesus, give me one. Just give me one more save, and we can get out of this thing with 2 points. And so that's what's been tough to watch with him this year is that he hasn't found the consistency. Because when he's at his best, and he has been at his best this year, he's looked pretty good. But when like when the bottom falls out, it falls out, and so that's been probably the biggest thing for me is that he just hasn't been able to string together starts the way he did last year. Um, and so I don't know if I would say he's regressed, like all caps regressed. Like he's certainly not as good as he was last year, no question. Um, it's been a consistency issue more so than anything because he's giving you like I said, he'll give you 3 good ones and then he'll give you 3 bad ones, and so you're just not sure what you're getting every night. But it's just so hard because you mentioned it, Pat. Like they're one of the best teams in the league 5-on-5 scoring. Rasmus Dahlin under any other circumstance would be firmly in the Norris Trophy conversation. He influences the game at that level, and instead they are so on the penalty kill. Like Chad DiDomenic has put out some goalie stats the other day. Like he showed like Luukkonen especially is really underperforming when they're shorthanded, which hurts you big time, obviously, because if you're not
Sure.
killing penalties, that you're getting lopsided in the special teams battle. Their power plays have been really inconsistent, really from the start of the season, and that goes back to last year. So any other game state aside from 5-on-5, they tend to be on the wrong side of the coin, and it's just adding up on them too quickly. And obviously you have that 13 game losing streak, which just everything went wrong, and you're just not going to recover from it. But with respect to Luukkonen, yeah, he's just not been as polished. There's some more leaky goals, little sloppy in his play. I wish I could put my finger on what it is, because a couple of years ago it was more like a technical issue, I thought, in terms of some of the stuff he just didn't do well. and then last year he cleaned it up so well, and he just hasn't strung it together this year.
At what point do you give Levi an extended look between the pipes? I'm not talking about one game, they lose 5-4 and then he's back in Rochester or he doesn't play for a couple of weeks. At what point does he get an extended look with this team? And is this a conversation that we probably should be having next season as opposed to this season? I feel like this is a lost season anyway. Maybe near the end, you give him an extended look. What's your thought on that?
That's a tough one because he's been so good. He's been so good in Rochester, but anytime he's been up, especially this year in particular, when he's been up with the big club, he's been their worst goaltender. By a long shot too. Like he's just I don't know what's going on with him because he is, his numbers in Rochester are sterling. And I think at this point, at least for me, like from a philosophical standpoint, I'm probably leaving him in Rochester as long as I can. And then depending on how things break down for you, like after the trade deadline, the final 3-4 weeks of the season, maybe I try to get him up for a week or two. But they're going to want him in Rochester for the playoffs. But my issue with him is at least last year, Levi had 2 really impressive stretches where he was posting like .930 save percentages. He really looked locked in. And then the bottom would end up falling out on him, and they'd send him back down to Rochester to kind of clean it up again. But there were some signs of promise, and this year he just hasn't had it at all. And so, and even like I granted, I don't get to watch many, if any, Rochester Americans games, so I'm going off like some highlights and just some clips that I've seen. But some of the stuff he's even doing in Rochester, I'm like, I don't think you get away with that at the NHL level. And so I'm not concerned about Levi's long-term outlook, not yet at least, but he's kind of putting him in a tough spot because he's not performing when they call him up. And it's the worry that I would have is like the NHL shooting talent is too good for him at his size. But the one thing I'm holding on to is that Dustin Wolf, who's the starting goaltender in Calgary right now, he's also a 7th round pick. He's almost the same measurables as Devin Levi, kind of a 6 foot, sub 6 foot goalie. So it's, really small for the NHL. He took 2 full seasons, actually, I think 3 full seasons, if I'm not mistaken, in the AHL. Calgary just left him in the AHL, let him cook, let him adjust to the shooting talent, and refine his game. And now he's stepped in this year and he's been terrific for them. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping they do here with Levi is they let Levi have another full season. He's going to get 50 plus games, I would think, in Rochester this year. And you ideally, have a really good base for him to build on for next fall. But you end up having a conversation then about, you're still gambling on him because he hasn't done it at the NHL level, but that's a whole nother podcast. But yeah, I honestly, right now, I'd probably sit on him. I'd probably let Reimer play a little bit more, if anything. But I would like to see them get Levi. Like, I think he's at 9 games right now. I'd like to see them get him to like 15 to 20 NHL games if they could. Yeah. Just because I think you got to see what you got.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So back to Kevyn Adams here. Are you surprised right now, to be honest, so we're in the 4 Nations break right now for the next 2 weeks. I kind of thought this might be a time where maybe Terry Pegula would make a move with this team. Again, being dead last in the conference. Are you surprised at all that Kevyn Adams, it appears anyway, is remaining on as GM likely through this break, this 2-week break? The trade deadline's coming up on March 7th. Feels like at a minimum, he's still here. My thought process, and again, not paying much attention to Sabres as much, was, well, Terry's all in with the Bills. And when the season ends, he's going to take a look at the Sabres. They're dead bottom. Maybe that's when the axe comes down on Kevyn Adams. Didn't happen. Probably not going to happen anytime soon, if at all, during this season. Who the hell knows after the season? Are you surprised right now that Kevyn Adams is, at this point of his career as Sabres GM, is still in charge?
No, not at all. And that's knowing how Pegula's operated with this team, especially since the Botterill firing. Everything that surrounded that was like, Botterill didn't want to make all the firings that Pegula wanted to have made in the hockey department. He was going to stand by his guys, and Pegula, they ousted him. They found a guy in Kevyn Adams who would make the firings. I think Mike Harrington, was the one who had a piece on it earlier this year where he really did a nice job recapping some of that. and calling out, like, I think it was Brian Burke, calling out like what Burke had said on Toronto radio in the wake of it all. But one big thing that came out post Botterill was, and I believe it was Elliot Friedman, who went on to say that Terry Pegula has effectively lost trust in NHL decision makers. And because the NHL put forward certain candidates for GM. And Jason Botterill, for to his credit, for a long time was a top GM candidate. And so people at the NHL were like, Terry, you should really take a look at this guy. He is, he's done wonderful things as the AGM in Pittsburgh. He's running Wilkes-Barre. He's doing a great job running the Wilkes-Barre baby pens, and all the things that made him a top GM candidate. And the same thing basically happened with Tim Murray. He's a super scout, right? So he's the prospect guy. He's going to help you through this rebuild. And both of those guys fell flat on them. I think, some of those coaching hires as well, definitely like, oh, here's the new hot coaching assistant. Here's the guy to take a look at, and like Phil Housley. And again, nothing worked out. So there was a big thing made about Pegula losing his faith, losing his trust in some of the advice that would have been given to him by like NHL people. Mm-hmm. And he could trust Kevyn Adams. He could trust himself in making his decision. And so I think that in effect has given Kevyn Adams an especially long rope. So when it comes to this season, under normal circumstances in a functioning NHL front office, he'd be gone, right? Any owner worth their salt would be like, get the hell out of here, buddy. You're done. Like 13-game losing streak. You didn't make any changes on that. Your roster's not working. You got to go. But I think Terry Pegula has an incredible level of trust and faith in Adams to the point where it's, might be detrimental to the outcome of his hockey team.
It's definitely detrimental to the outcome of this hockey team. Do you see a realistic path right now of Kevyn Adams getting a 6th season with this organization right now? And look, obviously, if they get red hot and they get within 5 to 6 points of a playoff spot at the end of the year, they made they showed so much progress at the end of the year, blah, blah, blah. I just don't think that's very realistic with this hockey team this season. Is there a realistic path? Do you think realistically Kevyn Adams could be back for a 6th season, man?
I do. I mean, I will. I'm going to hedge my bets a little bit here. I do think if they stay on their track right now and they end up finishing bottom 5, let's say nothing really changes, they end up in the bottom 5 of the NHL.
Sure.
You're glued to the draft lottery again. I'm sure everyone's excited for that. You're glued to that draft lottery show because you want to see if the Sabres are going to pick top 3 or whatever. Then I would think like maybe Pegula's got to think, we can't finish, 30th. We can't. This is just untenable. But certainly, if what you just described happens and they go on a bit more of a run here, where they maybe they win another 4 or 5 games in a row, they climb up to like 12th in the East, which is again nothing to write home about. But they make a little noise and
mm-hmm.
like they have done for a lot of springs. Then it's kind of like one of those things where, oh yeah, like no, some of this is working. Look, Dylan Cousins woke up. Dylan Cousins figured some stuff out and played better for us. That's where I think Pegula and Adams, to his extent, whatever influence he'd have, that's where he'd be back. But overall, like I think the direction they're heading right now is, I would imagine they want to keep him around. It comes down to then, like, is there a cutoff point? Like, is it 26th? Is it 30th? Like, where does Terry Pegula finally like draw the line here? I just don't know what the line is.
Well, all right, last question for you here, and then I'm going to let you go. So when it comes to this team and a lot of the frustrating narratives, obviously the Kevyn Adams presser earlier this season, that was frustrating. The Tage Thompson hit, we don't need to get into that. We all know how we feel about that. It was ridiculous. But for me, maybe the most frustrating thing about this team right now is they're buried. They've been buried for a lot of the season. They had that long losing streak, and this is his 5th full season as general manager. And what has been done, and we're in 2nd week of February now, okay? What's been the Sabres' big move this season? They claimed Reimer back off waivers. They got him back on the roster. What have they done? Yeah. Like, at this point in the season, you still haven't made a trade. You haven't sent any real, true, significant message to your organization. You've done basically nothing this entire season. You've just sat back, while this team just wallows in mediocrity. And now they're, again, like you said, they're fourth from the bottom. They're dead last in the East. They're about to extend an already historic record. They're going to overtake the Jets, at least for now, again, for the longest drought in all of professional sports. And they're just not doing anything about it. That to me might be the most frustrating part about this season compared to other losing seasons with the Sabres. The question that I wanted to ask you is, what's your most hopeful but also most realistic trade expectations for this team? We'll go through the deadline, although I will let people know, if you didn't know this, the Sabres could actually make a trade literally right now as Chris and I are talking. There's no games for 2 weeks, but teams could still make moves. Kevyn Adams could get fired right now while we're still talking as well. But from now through the trade deadline, we'll go March 7th, which that's what it is. And the Sabres, I think, got 7 games after this break. Realistically, what's the best that you can hope for? Like, what do you see happening with this team between now and March 7th?
So, all right. So let me go big picture for a second.
Sure.
The one thing with Adams to me is that's really defined the last 2 years for him is the inability to get the big one over the line. He's been in some conversations, going back not to this past summer, the summer before. Like Brett Pesce was a guy. Apparently, he was really chasing hard. He was in. He would have been in Carolina at the time. He would have been a great partner for Owen Power, a great partner. But Pesce wouldn't waive his no trade. And then you go back to this past summer. I don't know for sure it was Martin Necas. It seems like all the available evidence suggests that it was.
Yeah.
He was really, really close with Carolina on a deal for him, probably to the point where they had agreed on all the pieces. But Necas basically said, like, I don't want to play in Buffalo. The context that I think that's important to remember there is, like, the Sabres would have had control over him. They would have had some restricted free agent control, but I think what basically happened was Necas through his agent told any team, I'm going to go to unrestricted free agency. So the Sabres would have been giving up a massive package for maybe 2 seasons of a player, which, I mean, if it ends your drought, it's probably worth it. But overall, thinking strategically, there's some reason to take pause. So they miss out on that trade. And now you go through this whole season, all the drama in Vancouver with Elias Pettersson, JT Miller. It sounds like the Sabres were right in there for Pettersson. And as far as I understand it, as far as what's been reported and trying to piece together different, tidbits from different insiders, it sounds like the Sabres had their deal. They put their best offer in. They very well may have had the best offer for Pettersson, but the Vancouver Canucks then took all of the offers for Pettersson, all of the offers for Miller, and said, okay, what helps us most now and in the future? And they made the determination to trade JT Miller. So not that it isn't Kevyn Adams' fault, but you can't fully blame him for the Pettersson deal, for example. But at the end of the day, what his resume is going to show, what the scorecard shows, is that he just didn't get the deals done. And so to answer your question then about the deadline and what he's going to do, I mean, it's really tough to say with any certainty that he has the ability to get one of these big deals done. But he made a really smart trade last year for Casey Middlestat. That was a really good trade. He traded from a position of strength. He had a lot of centers to deal with, and he addressed a position of relative weakness, and he got Bowen Byram. That, I think he deserves probably more credit for making that deal. The Ryan McLeod deal over the summer was a really smart trade too. Again, position of power with all those first-round picks, and he got a player who could help him. So what it all boils down to for me, and what I hope is his primary focus is finding Owen Power a partner. And my personal favorite is Zach Whitecloud from the Vegas Golden Knights. I do not believe he is available right now. Vegas is too good. They are a Stanley Cup contender. He plays a really important role for them. He's a summer acquisition, probably. One name that's come up, I cannot take credit for this, but I came across it in the expected Buffalo group chat, and then I started doing some digging, and I started to fall in love with the idea. Is Michael Kesselring? He's playing out in Utah again. Probably not a player who's available right this second, but they might have some movement come down with their blue line. Elliot Friedman suggested it too, because they're getting healthy. But a right-handed defenseman who can play in their middle pair, who's going to be a little bit affordable. I think that's got to be number one on their list for the deadline, and he's going to have to he's going to have to take a poke at one here. He's going to have to put himself out there for a trade, and that's all I'm looking at right now for the deadline is, does he have the ability to go and make an impactful trade like he did last year? Again, to credit to Adams, as much as no one wants to give him credit right now, and he does not deserve much of it. He made a really clever move last year. Can he do that again? And finally, can one of these deals finally set something loose in this locker room to figure some stuff out? But there's kind of two lanes here. There's the big blockbuster, which is probably going to have to come at the draft, but there's also just address your needs, man. Figure this thing. You got a number 1 overall pick who does so many things well. I know Power's really in the crosshairs this year for the lack of physical play and things like that, but overall, like, get him a partner who can complement him. You've seen what Dahlin's doing with Byram this year. Round that group out, and so that's what it comes down to for me, is figure out a way to get one of these deals done for a I don't want to say an impact defenseman, because that would suggest like a top pair guy, but like a guy who really complements your group. That would go a long way to making this a more complete team.
I know Kevyn Adams wants to make a trade. I know he needs to make a trade, but I also feel like maybe he's got more job security than we think he does with Terry, and maybe that kind of lessens the direness of swinging for the fences before the trade deadline anyway, trying to make some impact before the end of the season, because maybe he's not GMing for his job this season, and maybe he's going to get the summer, and Terry's going to give him next season, make a couple moves over the summer where maybe some bigger trades are out there, like you alluded to, and see what happens. The one thing I know for sure is this roster as it stands right now, and I know they still got a couple young guys in the pipeline, but this roster's not, they need to shake things up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the same thing over and over again, and it feels like that's not going to change until they make some moves. Anyway, next time I have you on, which hopefully will be soon, I want to spend some time talking about, because again, the Sabres are on a break for a couple weeks, some of the pending unrestricted and restricted free agents. Zucker and Greenway are pending unrestricted free agents at the end of the year. What may happen with them? Cloud, Quinn, Peterka, Bowen, some pretty notable restricted free agents. I'd like to have some conversations with you about those players. I would do that now, but then I start yapping, and this becomes a 90-minute episode, man. I want to respect and appreciate your time. And everybody, if you haven't done so already, make sure you follow Chris on Twitter at what is it again? The initials. Because again, when I say it, I put it in the show notes as well. But when I say it out loud, I don't want to screw it up.
It's a mess. It's 2ITB_Buffalo.
Buffalo. I always screw that up. And make sure you check out the Instigator podcast that Chris and Tyler do as well. That is excellent. Appreciate your time, buddy, as always.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I'll be back with a brand new episode. Thank you again, Chris. I'll be back with a brand new episode. Matt Warren from SB Nation joins me tomorrow.